Something that is truly incomprehensible are the voids that occupies the space between the visible matter in the universe. Some voids, appropriately called super voids, can be millions of light years across. Take the Boötes void, for example. It's 250 million light years of almost nothingness. From this image, it might not look that bad until you realize that almost all of the galaxies shown in the circle lie in front or behind it. To date, only 60 galaxies has been found within this void. A space that large could easily contain 10,000 galaxies when compared to other regions. Just imagine if an alien civilization like our own exists on a planet within one of these galaxies. The nearest neighbor would be tens of millions of light years away. Even worse, if your planet is orbiting an intergalactic star, it's a star or star system that has been ejected from its home galaxy and is now floating freely through the cosmos. Magnetars is a form of extremely magnetic neutron stars. From around 400 kilometers, the magnetic field would strip you of all metallic objects such as your phone, watch, belt, glasses, and so on. And if you got really close, it would eventually start ripping out the iron in your red blood cells out of your body. There's a weird correlation between the distance and size of the sun and our moon, because during a solar eclipse the moon almost perfectly covers the sun, but there's really no physical reason why this has to be the case. The moon just happens to be 400 times smaller than the sun, but the sun just happens to be 400 times further from the Earth than the moon is. Another object we can see with the naked eye is the Andromeda galaxy, and it looks a little something like this. But because Andromeda is so far away, we only see the very bright center of it. If we could see all of Andromeda, our skies could look like this every night. It would be several times larger than the moon, even though it's 2.5 million light years away. Right now, no matter if you're moving or sitting still, in a universe where everything is orbiting, spinning or pulling, you're moving at incredible speeds. Electrons spins around the nucleus of atoms, and we humans, being made of atoms, rotate along with the Earth. The moon orbits the Earth, the Terran system rotates around the sun, and the Sol system rotates around the black hole in the center of the Milky Way galaxy. Several smaller galaxies part of the Milky Way subgroup orbits the Milky Way. The Milky Way subgroup rotates around the gravitational center located somewhere between the Milky Way and Andromeda, which is all part of a collection of larger galaxies called the local group. And our local group of galaxies orbits along other groups of galaxies within the Virgo supercluster. And this supercluster is along with countless other superclusters being pulled towards a much larger supercluster called the Great Attractor. And in turn, the Great Attractor is pulled towards the largest known supercluster in the local universe, named the Shapley supercluster. The days on Venus is longer than a Venusian year. Venusian. That sounds so sci-fi for some reason. Venusian. Basically, Venus completes an entire orbit around the Sun in a little more than 224 Earth days, but take 243 days to rotate around its own axis only once. Thus, its days are longer than its years. We all know that sound cannot travel in a vacuum, and that space is a vacuum. Sound waves cannot travel through it. Pretty basic stuff. I even talked about this in previous episodes. However, something that surprised me when researching for this episode is that this isn't exactly true. Because space is not the total vacuum it's often made out to be. Space contains lots of particles and atoms and gases, which sound can use as a medium to actually travel through. But of course these particles are very sparsely spread out, so you need an extremely sensitive microphone to be able to hear anything at all. And NASA did just that. They used a very sensitive microphone of sorts and aimed it at a galaxy with a black hole at its center. And the sound it produced is the lowest note in the universe, 57 octaves below middle C. The frequency is more than 1,000,000 billion times deeper than the limits of the human ear. Back in 1962, during the Cold War, the US decided to blow up a hydrogen bomb in space. Not only that, it was 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that hit Hiroshima during World War II. What's so crazy about it is that they did it because they simply wanted to see what happened. An equally insane plan was something called Project A119. The project had the goal of detonating a nuclear bomb on the moon. Fortunately, this never actually took place. Ever watched a sci-fi show such as Star Trek and wondered how they navigate? I mean, how do they know where to go when space is mostly nothing? Because you can't use a GPS in space, right? Well, scientists have been working on something called XNav. The way it works is by detecting signals from pulsars in a similar way to how a GPS sends and receives signals from satellites. Pulsars are dense, rapidly rotating stars sweeping their emissions across the cosmos at rates that are so stable they rival the performance of atomic clocks. This timing property is perfect for stellar navigation and would have an accuracy of between 5 to 10 kilometers. That's the equivalent of having a GPS here on Earth having an accuracy of a few nanometers. However, the technology to create such a device is not quite here yet, but we will almost certainly see it in the near future.
Turn right in 5 million light years.
You may or may not have heard about something called dark matter. Basically, when scientists use the word dark to explain something, it's some really complicated stuff. But I'm gonna try and explain it anyway. Think of our solar system. Our sun, all the planets and everything else that we can see has mass. The more mass an object has, the stronger gravitational force it has. Okay, we know this stuff. We can accurately calculate the correlation between mass and gravity. Now take the mass of the entire Milky Way galaxy. Take everything we can see and put all that mass together. But here's the problem. The amount of gravitational force that the galaxy has is not consistent with the amount of mass it has. We have done these calculations over and over again, accounting for all the stars, dust and gas, everything, but it never seems to add up. What does this mean? This means that there is something we cannot see affecting the gravity around us. And here is where dark matter comes into play. A good analogy could be wind, for example. If you're inside a house looking out a window, you can't see, feel or hear the wind outside. But if you look at that flag, you can see that it's somehow moving. Thus, you can prove that something you cannot see must be affecting it. And that's a very simplified version of what dark matter is. The most recent calculations shows that as much as 84.5% of the total matter in the universe could be dark matter. A common argument you hear people use against space exploration is that we still have huge problems down here on Earth and that we should focus on solving these issues first before we even start thinking about venturing out into space. And while it is true that we as a species have yet to solve numerous major global problems with our society and the planet itself, space exploration does actually help you down here on Earth more than you might think. For example, when NASA tried to find ways to minimize the size of the cameras on their spacecrafts, it led to the invention of the first active pixel sensor. It's the reason we can all do this with our phones today. In the 1980s, NASA developed a unique polyamide material which could be used to make flexible circuits. How would that benefit me, you'll say? Well, today almost every electronic consumer product like mobile phones, digital cameras, TVs, computers, etc. is made possible because of this. NASA's robotic research has greatly contributed to both the appearance and functionality of artificial limbs. Scratch-resistant glass was invented for the visor on astronauts' helmets. Many of the athletic shoes you can buy today were inspired by the spacesuits from the Apollo missions. Today you can find space blankets in almost every first aid kit. Infrared ear thermometers measures your body temperature the same way NASA measures the temperature of stars. They have developed water purification systems which can yield safe, drinkable water from some of the most challenging sources such as urine, sweat and even mud. These systems are helping people without fresh water around the world right now. The point is, not that we must go to space to find these technologies. The point is that because we went to space, we did. The Sun. At its core, the immense pressure and temperatures produce a staggering 15 million degrees Celsius. Here, sunlight is produced and after bouncing around the solar interior for up to 200,000 years, it finally reaches the surface to be released into space. At the surface, the Sun is a lot cooler but still incredibly hot. It's still around 5,500 degrees or so. Yet here, on the surface of the Sun, we have found water. Not in a liquid state, but in the form of steam. More specifically, this water has been found in these darker, slightly cooler regions called sunspots. You know, when a spacecraft takes off and a huge cloud of smoke is formed, usually covering the entire launch site, this is actually not smoke. Well, some of it is, but most of it is actually steam from the pool of water underneath the spacecraft. The water is used to absorb some of the acoustic shock waves created during takeoff that could potentially bounce off the platform and basically shake the spacecraft apart. There's a mysterious phenomenon called long-delayed echoes. If you're in a large empty room, it's likely that sound will reflect off the surroundings and produce an echo. Radio signals kind of work the same way. So for example, radio waves that hit the moon bounce back towards the Earth and produce an echo 2.7 seconds later. Now the strange thing is, people have sent radio signals into space and heard echoes up to 40 seconds later. If it were an object in space, it would be way beyond the moon. Right now, no one really knows what's causing the echoes, but the most likely theory is that the signal somehow gets trapped in the atmosphere before bouncing back towards the Earth. Or you know, it could be some bored aliens playing space pong with us. One of the two. On the morning of September 1st, 1859, astronomer Richard Carrington was observing the Sun and noticed a cluster of enormous sunspots. After a while, Carrington spotted a sudden explosion of light erupting out of the sunspots. What he saw was something that is now referred to as a coronal mass ejection, or CME for short. The most devastating effect of these solar superstorms is that they can wipe out anything electronic. The Earth is basically bombarded with EMPs. Luckily for us, society's electrical framework was in its infancy at the time, and thus we didn't really experience any significant damage. Still, the event was powerful enough that it caused telegraphs to actually catch fire, while auroras could be seen across the globe. Imagine if an event like this struck the Earth today, at a time when everything and everyone so heavily depend on electricity. If the storm is strong enough, it could cause an apocalyptic event, taking years or even decades to recover from. What's even scarier is that in 2012, this almost happened.
A CME equal to or possibly even stronger than the Carrington event went straight through Earth's orbit. Luckily, Earth wasn't there this time. It's always hard to imagine the vastness of space. Take the moon for example, because it's something we can actually see with the naked eye. It feels like it's not that far away. I mean, we know it is, but we just don't have anything to actually compare that distance to. But if I put it like this, between the Earth and the moon, we can fit not one, not two, not three, but all 8 planets in the solar system side by side with a few thousand kilometers to spare. And that's just between us and the freaking moon. The distances between the planets and beyond is just inconceivable. This is one of those facts where even I, as I'm reading this, have a hard time believing it's actually real. Another thing that speaks for the vastness, or maybe I should say the emptiness of space, is the fact that the Sun contains 99.85% of the total matter in our solar system. That leaves us with the insignificantly small amount of 0.135% for all the planets including Earth. And that's just in our solar system. On a galactic scale, let's just say there would be a lot of zeros. NASA has its very own radio station called Third Rock Radio. Get it? Third Rock? Anyway, on this channel they play rock and alternative music along with space news and NASA mission updates throughout. Rocket launches that take place between 30 to 60 minutes before sunrise or after sunset produce a beautifully colorful effect called the twilight phenomenon. Basically, when the spacecraft rises out of the darkness and into the sunlit area of the still rising or setting sun, water left in the vapor trail of the launch vehicle reacts with a less dense upper atmosphere. The exhaust plume, which is suspended against the backdrop of the dark night sky behind it, is then illuminated by the sun. When we look at things in space, almost everything appears to be round. Large bodies are sphere-shaped, orbits are circular or elliptical, even solar systems and entire galaxies are spinning around and for the most part take the shape of a disk. Then there's Saturn. Saturn's north pole is quite bizarre as it goes against the natural roundness of the universe and takes the shape of a hexagon. The strange cloud pattern was first discovered in 1981, and while some theories exist, it remains unexplained. And it's possible that Jupiter have similar shapes, but as we've never actually taken a good photo of Jupiter's poles, we just don't know yet. Maybe when the spacecraft Juno arrives in 2016, this mystery can be solved. Lastly, I just want to show you something, a simple image of the Andromeda Galaxy. We've all probably seen an image or a photo of it before, after all it's the closest spiral galaxy to our own. It was even the default background on Apple's OS X line, so millions have definitely seen it. Nevertheless, this is not just a common photo. At 69,536 by 22,230 pixels, or 1.5 billion pixels in total, this 4.3 gigabyte file is the largest photo of the Andromeda Galaxy ever taken. And it reveals something we have known all along, but it's really something else when you actually get to see it for yourself. As we come closer, it almost looks like there's an extreme amount of grain. But as we advance, individual dots emerge from the chaos, and we begin to realize what 1 trillion stars actually looks like. As with any journey into uncharted territory, unforeseen problems will almost definitely arise. And when they do, you better hope you have the means to solve these problems, because no one is coming to help you in space. The Apollo missions to the moon were no exceptions and did indeed encounter a few issues along the way. A problem no one could have foreseen, however, was moon dust. The moon is covered with an extremely fine powder-like substance. At first glance, it's harmless. I mean, after all, it's just dust. But as the Apollo astronauts would discover, it wasn't as harmless as it first seemed. Moon dust is created by micrometeorite impacts which completely pulverize the lunar surface. Because there's no wind or any other natural elements on the moon which can gradually erode these tiny particles and fragments, they remain extremely sharp. This moon dust prevented spacesuits and other equipment from working as intended. For example, astronauts had trouble moving their arms during moonwalks as the joints of the suits became damaged by the moon dust. It's so corrosive that it even cut through 3 layers of Kevlar-like material on one of the astronauts' boots. To make matters worse, it's also electrostatic, which makes it cling to anything it comes in contact with. After long moonwalks, the spacesuits were covered in this black soot that both looked and smelled like gunpowder. As it was more or less impossible not to bring the dust back into the lunar module, it caused some pretty significant issues for the astronauts themselves. It got so bad during the Apollo 12 mission that the astronauts were forced to keep their helmets on inside the module to prevent as much of it as possible from getting into their eyes and lungs. Does life exist beyond the Earth? I've talked about this many times before, and of course the answer is always, we don't know. But that isn't technically true. We can almost certainly say that life does exist on both the moon and on Mars. When NASA and other space agencies send stuff and people to other worlds in the solar system, they go through meticulous stages of sterilization. But there's a great irony in this sterilization process, because while these harshly sterilized environments do indeed get rid of bacteria and other microbial life forms that we do not want to contaminate other celestial bodies with, they also provide the perfect conditions for bacteria that can survive in space and thus other planets. Essentially, we're able to remove almost everything except the things that have the greatest chance of surviving in space. However, just because they hitch a ride to another world does not mean we'll see Martians or Moonsians anytime soon. It's more than likely that these extremophiles will eventually die instead of evolving into something new. Still, it is now for the first time in our history technically wrong to say that the Earth is the only place in the universe with life. Ever since the discovery of Saturn, people have been fascinated by the planet's rings. It really makes Saturn stand out from the rest of the planets and makes it easily recognizable. But since the 1970s, we've discovered that Saturn isn't such a special snowflake after all. In fact, we now know that all the gas giants in our solar system have these rings. In order of their discovery, these include Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, and Neptune. But aside from Saturn, these ring systems are composed of mostly dust and particles, which makes them extremely faint. But there's actually one more body in the solar system known to have rings. It's neither a planet, dwarf planet, nor a moon, but instead something classified as a centaur. A centaur is a minor planet that orbits the sun between Jupiter and Neptune and crosses the orbits of one or more planets. And yeah, they're named after the mythological beings of the same name. The centaur, known as 10199 Cariclo, is the largest one to be discovered so far, and it just so happens to also have rings. It's the first of its kind, and before its discovery, no one thought it was even possible for small bodies like these to have a ring system. Personally, I think one of the most amazing things about space is weightlessness. Floating around without the constant struggle against gravity must be an incredibly alleviating sensation. But weightlessness causes the human body to behave in ways that make completely normal things not so normal. For example, you can't burp in space. The reason we burp is because air enters our stomach while we eat or drink, for example. But our stomach doesn't really like air and other gases, so it tries to push it back out. All the food and liquid stays at the bottom while the unwanted gases is pushed to the top. But it's only able to do this because of gravity. In the absence of gravity, or in microgravity, all the gas, liquids and food are unable to separate, which makes it difficult to only push gas back out again. This will cause you to slightly vomit instead of simply burping and is known as a wet burp. Another annoyance comes with urinating. Our body normally lets us know that it's time to pee when our bladder is around 1/3 full. But in low gravity environments, the fluid will just keep bouncing around. Only when the bladder is almost completely full do the sides begin to stretch and trigger the urge to pee. Even something as basic as sleep can be quite dangerous and even life-threatening if not done correctly. What you need to make sure of before you go to sleep in space is that you have to have good ventilation around you. Because if you don't, there's a risk that you'll end up with a bubble of your own exhaled carbon dioxide. This will result in oxygen starvation and, best case, you'll wake up with a severe headache, struggling to breathe. Being an astronaut requires you to be exceptional at a lot of things. One example is that you need to be able to remain calm and focused during very stressful situations. But that's of course easier said than done, given that when you're out on a spacewalk, there's only a suit between you and the vacuum of space. Now, what if, against all odds, your spacesuit began filling with water? In 2013, this is exactly what happened to Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano while performing repairs on the ISS. Roughly an hour into the spacewalk, he noticed that his helmet was slowly filling with water. As he reported this to the people on the ground, the volume of the water just kept on increasing, and at the time they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Eventually it was deemed that there was a chance of him actually drowning in his own suit, so the mission was quickly aborted. It was later revealed that the liquid cooling system in the suit had caused a leak. Of course, Parmitano, being a trained professional, remained completely calm when faced with the possibility of being the first man to drown in space. This is the only photo taken from the surface of another body beyond Mars. It was taken in 2005 and is from the surface of Saturn's largest moon, Titan. Now, Titan is an interesting place. Just like the Earth, it has lakes and rivers. Unlike the Earth, these are not filled with water, but instead liquid ethane, methane and propane. You see, the average temperature on Titan is around -180 degrees Celsius. Because it's so extremely cold, the probe only remained functional for about 90 minutes after touchdown and was only able to send this single photograph from the surface. Titan also has a very interesting atmosphere which consists of a thick haze. The atmosphere is several times denser than here on Earth, and gravity on Titan is several times weaker. If you weighed say 80 kilo, you would only weigh around 12 kilo on Titan. In fact, if you could theoretically survive on the surface and had a wingsuit on, because of the low gravity coupled with the dense atmosphere, you would be able to fly simply by waving your arms around. In 1936, just before the eruption of World War II, Adolf Hitler made a speech during the Olympic Games opening ceremony, which was broadcasted to 41 countries across the globe, reaching millions of people. It's significant because it was broadcasted at a very high frequency, which likely allowed the signals to get through the Earth's ionosphere. In other words, the signals were able to escape the Earth and continued out into space. This has led some to believe that one of the first things potential aliens might hear are the words of Adolf Hitler. In fact, this is the exact plot for the book written by Carl Sagan titled Contact. It was even made into a movie in 1997. But this is only within the realm of science fiction and could never actually happen in real life. You see, many TV shows and other signals like these will drastically diffuse over time and at best will only be able to propagate a couple of light years away before they become identical to background noise. It's something known as inverse square law. Even if some of these signals inexplicably made it to some of the closest exoplanets to the Earth, and we assume that intelligent extraterrestrials do exist on one of these planets, and these aliens just happens to aim the correct technology able to pick up these unbelievably weak and quiet signals towards the Earth, they would still most likely not be able to extract any audio, visuals, or other tangible information from these signals. They would simply be too feeble and diluted once they get there. However, given that they can detect these signals in the first place, they would likely recognize them as technological signatures, something that could not have occurred naturally in space, and would thus give them a confirmation to the eternal question, are we alone in the universe? When we think of planets, we think of them as orbiting around a star. In fact, a planet is defined as a celestial body moving in an elliptical orbit round a star. But what if something should happen to that star which leaves the planet all alone? Or if something happens to the planet which causes it to slingshot away from its star system on an endless, lonesome journey through the cosmos? Astronomers have theorized about the existence of such rogue planets for decades, and it's only recently that we've actually found them. But they can be incredibly difficult to discover. After all, once they leave their parent star, they become near invisible against the blackness of space. The planet will find itself in an eternal state of night, and the only visible light will come from the galaxy itself. Some estimate that there could be billions of rogue planets in the Milky Way alone, and so far we've only found a handful, most of which could just as well be brown dwarfs, or in other words, a failed star. But the concept of a rogue planet gives rise to a whole set of new questions. One of the most perplexing: could life potentially exist and survive on a planet without a star? Maybe. If it's a planet with a lot of water, that water will obviously freeze as it's exposed to the near absolute zero temperatures of space. But ice is actually a pretty good insulator, so if the ocean is at least a few tens of kilometers deep, the water will remain liquid at the bottom because of the heat internally generated by the planet's core. Life could then thrive around hotspots like hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. Another alternative would be if the planet had an extremely hydrogen-rich atmosphere. It would need to be tens or even hundreds of times thicker than the atmosphere here on Earth, which would then act as an insulator to retain liquid water even at the surface. Orbital debris, which is any man-made object in orbit around our planet which doesn't serve any useful purpose, is becoming an increasing problem. We're currently tracking around 600,000 pieces of debris larger than 1 centimeter. Roughly 30,000 of these are over 1 decimeter wide, but there's still many hundreds of millions of pieces which are simply too small to keep track of. What's so dangerous about these seemingly insignificant tiny fragments is the speed at which they travel. They orbit the Earth at speeds up to 28,000 kilometers per hour. Even something as tiny as flecks of paint can be disastrous when traveling at these velocities. In fact, a number of space shuttle windows have been replaced simply because of damage caused by flecks of paint. Usually when a tracked piece of debris is about to collide with a functional spacecraft, a so-called debris avoidance maneuver is performed. This actually happens all the time, and even aboard the ISS, in which the entire space station is moved a few kilometers to avoid a potential collision. But the thing is, we may already have crossed a point of no return. Even if we stop sending anything into space right this moment, it will continue to get worse. You see, the amount of debris which is already in orbit will continue to collide with each other and thus create even more debris. So far the problem is manageable, but a solution needs to be found quickly. And while NASA and many others are working on solutions, it's not an easy problem to solve. I mean, the sheer scale and cost of resolving this issue is like nothing we've ever seen before, and if we do nothing, we will quite literally enclose the Earth in a blanket of garbage. There's something known as the overview effect. Many astronauts and cosmonauts alike have reported a strong sensation of euphoria and even a significant cognitive shift in their perspective on life as well as themselves once they saw the Earth from a distance. Many have explained it as an overwhelming sensation that everything in the universe is somehow connected, that national boundaries completely vanish, coupled with the realization that our world is incredibly fragile. It sounds like they're high, right? Maybe someone brought a little something with them on their trip to space, who knows? But at the same time, it seems like a quite reasonable reaction. Looking back at the Earth from a distance must be an experience like none other. And what makes it so interesting is that it's not an isolated incident. Many people who have returned from space after looking back at our planet, either from orbit or from the moon, have explained the sensation in a very similar fashion. Psychologists, neuroscientists and physicians have all reported that many of these people have had a notable shift in their behavior and outlook on life and the world. To end this video, here's a quote from astronaut Edgar D. Mitchell describing what he experienced upon seeing the Earth from the moon. You develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics looks so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of their neck and drag him 250,000 miles out and say, "Look at that, you son of a bitch."
So, why is it called Area 51? To begin with, it's not the official name. The official name is Nevada Test and Training Range, or simply the Groom Lake Base. It's believed the name Area 51 came about because the facility borders a place called Nevada Test Site. This place, which was used to test nuclear bombs after World War II, is mapped as a grid of squares numbered between 1 and 30. Area 51, while not part of this grid, borders Area 15, which many say is the reason for its now iconic name. In 1997, the radio program Coast to Coast AM got a call from a frantic man claiming to be an ex-Area 51 employee.
Where are you now?
A former employee.
Former employee.
I was let go on a medical discharge about a week ago, and I've kind of been running across the country. Oh man, I don't know where to start. I started getting...
After a while, the radio station suddenly lost the connection.
In some way, something knocked us off the air, and we're on a backup system now.
It's the government, or...
I don't know.
It has to be something, though.
Many believe that the Area 51 we see on the surface is only the tip of the iceberg. It's thought that the area also has a huge network of tunnels and facilities going several stories underground. Entrances like this can be found around the complex, for example. However, like most things about Area 51, it's impossible to say for sure. One of the most controversial and famous stories surrounding Area 51 is that of Bob Lazar. Ever since 1989, he claims to have worked near Area 51 in a facility called S4, where he supposedly worked on reverse engineering alien technology. Lazar claims he saw a range of different alien spacecrafts and has provided detailed information on how these vehicles actually worked. For example, he says the fuel these vehicles used was an element with an atomic weight of 115, which allowed the crafts to create some sort of anti-gravity effect. Interestingly, element 115 or ununpentium was first discovered in 2003, 14 years after Lazar first mentioned it. He also claims that he was given briefings describing how extraterrestrials have visited Earth for the past 100,000 years. The beings originate from a planet within the Zeta Reticuli star system, which is located about 39 light-years from Earth. However, so far, no planets have been found to orbit the binary star system. But he's been largely discredited for several other reasons as well. For example, he claims to have a master's degree from MIT, but there's no records of that whatsoever. No one at the school remembers him, and when asked to name some of his professors, he gave the name of a professor at a different school, named Pierce Junior College. Lazar was also registered in one of his courses at Pierce Junior College the same time
time, he claims to have attended MIT. So if he's lying about his education, what else is he lying about? However, Lazar still stands by his claims 25 years later, but also adds that he doesn't want anything to do with UFOs anymore and has left it all in the past. Today, the only place where you can actually see Area 51 with your own eyes is a place called Tikaboo Peak. However, you still need binoculars or some sort of telescope to see it, as it's 42 kilometers away. Previously, you could view it at much closer distances from two places called White Sides and Freedom Ridge, but these locations were later seized by the government in 1995. Each weekday, about 20 flights in each direction transports around 1,000 workers between Las Vegas and their jobs at Area 51. The unmarked white planes with a single red line on the side use the call sign Janet and takes off from their own terminal at the McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas. Janet is believed to stand for Joint Air Network of Employee Transportation. The planes are the only ones allowed to enter the airspace above and around Area 51, not even military aircrafts are allowed to enter. It's also interesting that no one seems to wear suits or uniforms, everyone is dressed pretty casual. In 1974, astronauts aboard the space station Skylab 4 inadvertently photographed Area 51 while in orbit. There were specific instructions not to do this, and was the only location on Earth which had such an instruction. The photograph was published despite discussion of classified information. However, no one noticed the photo until 2007, 33 years later. During the production of the 1996 movie Independence Day, the US military had agreed to support the film by providing vehicles, costumes, and allowing the crew to film at military bases. However, after learning of the Area 51 references in the script, they immediately withdrew their support. Even though some form of military base at Groom Lake has been known to exist for several decades now, the US government has never actually acknowledged this. This is until July last year, when the CIA released papers documenting the history of several previously classified projects. These documents make several references to the Area 51 facility and reveals that it was, for example, used to test the spy planes Lockheed U-2 and A-12. And in December of last year, Obama became the first US president in history to publicly mention Area 51. So, the question you're all asking, what is really going on at Area 51? Crashed UFOs, extraterrestrial experimentation, cutting-edge technological developments, weather-controlling devices, or super mega sensational uber top-notch smashing glorious marvelous outstanding amazing bewildering secret military stuff?
In a world with secrets, exists a place that is secret.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm gonna stop now. When I started making this episode, I was quite optimistic really, and wanted to find some truth, some fact about what might be going on at Area 51. And what I found in all the stories I've read is that when a secret creates an information vacuum, wild speculation often fills the void. Basically, it can be boiled down to this: the government won't reveal what's going on there, so it must be something ultra super amazingly secret. The thing is, if we look at historical evidence and not the word of any single person, Area 51 is a military base used for the development and testing of experimental aircrafts and weapon systems. After all, that's why the base was created in the first place. They needed a suitable testing site for the spy plane U-2. I mean, come on, you don't test a spy plane, which is all about being secret, out in the open, especially during the time of the Cold War. No, you find a remote, hard-to-access location, preferably with big-ass mountains all around, and a big flat surface where all your secret, never-before-tested experimental little planes can just chill out and be tested safely all day long without anyone knowing or harming anyone in the process. Or maybe, just maybe, that's what they want you to think, right? Giorgio, what's your thoughts on this?
we were visited by ETs.